Section 12 of Confessions, volumes 5 and 6. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions, volumes 5 and 6, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, anonymously translated. Section 12. Volume 6. Hoc erat in votis, modus agri non ita magnus, hortus ubi et tecto vicinus iugis aquae fons, et paululum silvae superis foret. I cannot add auctius atque di melius fecere, but no matter, the former is enough for my purpose. I had no occasion to have any property there, it was sufficient that I enjoyed it. For I have long since both said and felt that the proprietor and possessor are two very different people, even leaving husbands and lovers out of the question. At this moment began the short happiness of my life, those peaceful and rapid moments which have given me a right to say, I have lived. Precious and ever regretted moments! Oh, recommence your delightful course, pass more slowly through my memory, if possible, than you actually did in your fugitive succession. How shall I prolong, according to my inclination, this recital, at once so pleasing and simple? How shall I continue to relate the same occurrences without wearying my readers with the repetition, any more than I was satiated with the enjoyment? Again, if all this consisted of facts, actions, or words, I could somehow or other convey an idea of it. But how shall I describe what was neither said nor done, nor even thought, but enjoyed, felt, without being able to particularize any other object of my happiness than the bare idea? I rose with the sun, and was happy. I walked, and was happy. I saw Madame de Warrens, and was happy. I quitted her, and still was happy. Whether I rambled through the woods, over the hills, or strolled along the valley, read, was idle, worked in the garden, or gathered fruits, happiness continually accompanied me. It was fixed on no particular object, it was within me, nor could I depart from it a single moment. Nothing that passed during that charming epoch, nothing that I did, said, or thought has escaped my memory. The time that preceded or followed it I only recollect by intervals, unequally and confused. But here I remember all as distinctly as if it existed at this moment. Imagination, which in my youth was perpetually anticipating the future, but now takes a retrograde course, makes some amends by these charming recollections for the deprivation of hope, which I have lost forever. I no longer see anything in the future that can tempt my wishes. It is a recollection of the past alone that can flatter me, and the remembrance of the period I am now describing is so true and lively that it sometimes makes me happy, even in spite of my misfortunes. Of these recollections I shall relate one example, which may give some idea of their force and precision. The first day we went to sleep at Les Charmettes, the way being uphill, and Madame de Warrens rather heavy, she was carried in a chair, while I followed on foot. Fearing the chairmen would be fatigued, she got out about halfway, designing to walk the rest of it. As we passed along, she saw something blue in the hedge, and said, "There's some periwinkle in flower yet." I had never seen any before, nor did I stop to examine this. My sight is too short to distinguish plants on the ground, and I only cast a look at this as I passed. An interval of near 30 years had elapsed before I saw any more periwinkle, at least before I observed it, when being at Cressier in 1764 with my friend Monsieur du Peyrou, we went up a small mountain, on the summit of which there is a level spot, called with reason Bellevue. I was then beginning to herbalize. Walking and looking among the bushes, I exclaimed with rapture, "Ah, there's some periwinkle!" Du Peyrou, who perceived my transport, was ignorant of the cause, but will some day be informed, I hope, on reading this. The reader may judge by this impression, made by so small an incident, what an effect must have been produced by every occurrence of that time. Meantime, the air of the country did not restore my health. I was languishing and became more so. I could not endure milk, and was obliged to discontinue the use of it. Water was at this time the fashionable remedy for every complaint. Accordingly, I entered on a course of it, and so indiscreetly that it almost released me not only from my illness but also from my life. The water I drank was rather hard and difficult to pass, as water from mountains generally is. In short, I managed so well that in the course of 2 months I totally ruined my stomach, which until that time had been very good, and no longer digesting anything properly, had no reason to expect a cure. At this time an accident happened, as singular in itself as in its subsequent consequences, which can only terminate with my existence. One morning, being no worse than usual, while putting up the leaf of a small table, I felt a sudden and almost inconceivable revolution throughout my whole frame. I know not how to describe it better than as a kind of tempest, which suddenly rose in my blood, and spread in a moment over every part of my body. My arteries began beating so violently that I not only felt their motion, but even heard it, particularly that of the carotids, attended by a loud noise in my ears, which was of 3, or rather 4 distinct kinds. For instance, first a grave, hollow buzzing, then a more distinct murmur, like the running of water, then an extremely sharp hissing, attended by the beating I before mentioned, and whose throbs I could easily count, without feeling my pulse, or putting a hand to any part of my body. This internal tumult was so violent that it has injured my auricular organs, and rendered me from that time not entirely deaf, but hard of hearing. My surprise and fear may easily be conceived. Imagining it was the stroke of death, I went to bed, and the physician being sent for, trembling with apprehension, I related my case, judging it past all cure. I believe the doctor was of the same opinion. However, he performed his office, running over a long string of causes and effects, beyond my comprehension, after which, in consequence of this sublime theory, he set about, in anima vili, the experimental part of his art. But the means he was pleased to adopt in order to effect a cure were so troublesome, disgusting, and followed by so little effect, that I soon discontinued it, and after some weeks, finding I was neither better nor worse, left my bed, and returned to my usual method of living. But the beating of my arteries and the buzzing in my ears has never quitted me a moment during the 30 years' time which has elapsed since that time. Till now I had been a great sleeper, but a total privation of repose, with other alarming symptoms which have accompanied it, even to this time, persuaded me I had but a short time to live. This idea tranquillized me for a time. I became less anxious about a cure, and being persuaded I could not prolong life, determined to employ the remainder of it as usefully as possible. This was practicable by a particular indulgence of nature, which, in this melancholy state, exempted me from sufferings which it might have been supposed I should have experienced. I was incommoded by the noise, but felt no pain, nor was it accompanied by any habitual inconvenience, except nocturnal wakefulness, and at all times a shortness of breath, which is not violent enough to be called an asthma, but was troublesome when I attempted to run or use any degree of exertion. This accident, which seemed to threaten the dissolution of my body, only killed my passions, and I have reason to thank Heaven for the happy effect produced by it on my soul. I can truly say I only began to live when I considered myself as entering the grave, for estimating at their real value those things I was quitting, I began to employ myself on nobler objects, namely by anticipating those I hoped shortly to have the contemplation of, and which I had hitherto too much neglected. I had often made light of religion, but was never totally devoid of it. Consequently, it cost me less pain to employ my thoughts on that subject, which is generally thought melancholy, though highly pleasing to those who make it an object of hope and consolation. Madame de Warrens, therefore, was more useful to me on this occasion than all the theologians in the world would have been. She, who brought everything into a system, had not failed to do as much by religion, and this system was composed of ideas that bore no affinity to each other. Some were extremely good, and others very ridiculous, being made up of sentiments proceeding from her disposition, and prejudices derived from education. Men in general make God like themselves. The virtuous make him good, and the profligate make him wicked. Ill-tempered and bilious devotees see nothing but hell, because they would willingly damn all mankind, while loving and gentle souls disbelieve it altogether. And one of the astonishments I could never overcome is to see the good Fénelon speak of it in his Telemachus, as if he really gave credit to it. But I hope he lied in that particular, for however strict he might be in regard to truth, a bishop absolutely must lie sometimes. Madame de Warrens spoke truth with me, and that soul, made up without gall, who could not imagine a revengeful and ever angry God, saw only clemency and forgiveness, where devotees bestowed inflexible justice and eternal punishment. She frequently said there would be no justice in the Supreme Being, should he be strictly just to us, because, not having bestowed what was necessary to render us essentially good, it would be requiring more than he had given. The most whimsical idea was that, not believing in hell, she was firmly persuaded of the reality of purgatory. This arose from her not knowing what to do with the wicked, being loath to damn them utterly, nor yet caring to place them with the good till they had become so. And we must really allow that, both in this world and the next, the wicked are very troublesome company. It is clearly seen that the doctrine of original sin and the redemption of mankind is destroyed by this system, consequently that the basis of the Christian dispensation, as generally received, is shaken, and that the Catholic faith cannot subsist with these principles. Madame de Warrens, notwithstanding, was a good Catholic, or at least pretended to be one, and certainly desired to become such. But it appeared to her that the Scriptures were too literally and harshly explained, supposing that all we read of everlasting torments were figurative threatenings, and the death of Jesus Christ an example of charity, truly divine, which should teach mankind to love God and each other. In a word, faithful to the religion she had embraced, she acquiesced in all its professions of faith, but on a discussion of each particular article, it was plain she thought diametrically opposite to that church whose doctrines she professed to believe. In these cases, she exhibited simplicity of art, a frankness more eloquent than sophistry, which frequently embarrassed her confessor, for she disguised nothing from him. "I am a good Catholic," she would say, "and will ever remain so. I adopt with all the powers of my soul the decisions of our Holy Mother Church. I am not mistress of my faith, but I am of my will, which I submit to you without reserve. I will endeavor to believe all. What can you require more?" Had there been no Christian morality established, I am persuaded she would have lived as if regulated by its principles, so perfectly did they seem to accord with her disposition. She did everything that was required, and she would have done the same had there been no such requisition. But all this morality was subordinate to the principles of Monsieur Tavel, or rather, she pretended to see nothing in religion that contradicted them. Thus she would have favored 20 lovers in a day, without any idea of a crime, her conscience being no more moved in that particular than her passions. I know that a number of devotees are not more scrupulous, but the difference is, they are seduced by constitution, she was blinded by her sophisms. In the midst of conversations the most affecting, I might say the most edifying, she would touch on this subject, without any change of air or manner, and without being sensible of any contradiction in her opinions. So much was she persuaded that our restrictions on that head are merely political, and that any person of sense might interpret, apply, or make exceptions to them, without any danger of offending the Almighty. Though I was far enough from being of the same opinion in this particular, I confess I dared not combat hers. Indeed, as I was situated, it would have been putting myself in rather awkward circumstances, since I could only have sought to establish my opinion for others, myself being an exception. Besides, I entertained but little hopes of making her alter hers, which never had any great influence on her conduct, and at the time I am speaking of, none. But I have promised faithfully to describe her principles, and I will perform my engagement. I now return to myself. Finding in her all those ideas I had occasion for to secure me from the fears of death and its future consequences, I drew confidence and security from this source. My attachment became warmer than ever, and I would willingly have transmitted to her my whole existence, which seemed ready to abandon me. From this redoubled attachment, a persuasion that I had but a short time to live, and profound security on my future state, arose an habitual and even pleasing serenity, which, calming every passion that extends our hopes and fears, made me enjoy without inquietude or concern the few days which I imagined remained for me. What contributed to render them still more agreeable was an endeavor to encourage her rising taste for the country, by every amusement I could possibly devise, wishing to attach her to her garden, poultry, pigeons, and cows. I amused myself with them, and these little occupations, which employed my time without injuring my tranquillity, were more serviceable than a milk diet, or all the remedies bestowed on my poor shattered machine, even to effecting the utmost possible re-establishment of it. The vintage and gathering in our fruit employed the remainder of the year. We became more and more attached to a rustic life, and the society of our honest neighbors. We saw the approach of winter with regret, and returned to the city as if going into exile. To me this return was particularly gloomy, who never expected to see the return of spring, and thought I took an everlasting leave of Les Charmettes. I did not quit it without kissing the very earth and trees, casting back many a wishful look as I went towards Chambéry. End of section 12. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.